My girlfriend told me, if you can't handle me partying with my ex, maybe we should break up. I said, fine. The next day I took a promotion across the country. When she texted, can we talk? I sent her a picture from my new apartment. Can you imagine your own family choosing your toxic ex over you? Because that's exactly what happened when I tried to finally stand up for myself. I felt like I was losing everything that mattered, but what happened next? Well, it ended up setting me free in a way I never, ever saw coming. I was 27 when this whole mess started, and honestly, I thought I had my life pretty much figured out. My name's Caleb, and back then, I was living in a small but cozy apartment downtown, working a job I actually liked, a rare enough thing, right? And I was dating a woman, Rachel, who I truly believed I could see a future with. She was smart, charming, the kind of person who could walk into any room and effortlessly command attention. She had this spark, this vibrant energy that drew everyone in, and I genuinely admired that about her, or at least I thought I did. Our future felt tangible, like a path laid out before us, clear and bright. Things started off great between us, a whirlwind of dates and laughter, but over the past few months, something had really shifted. It wasn't a sudden break, more like a slow, creeping chill that settled into the corners of our relationship. I couldn't quite put my finger on it at first. Little things. Late-night texts she wouldn't let me see, her phone always face down, always just out of my casual glance. Girls' nights that suddenly included guys she swore were just friends. And this general air of defensiveness, a palpable tension any time I dared to ask where she'd been or what she'd been up to. I'm not a jealous person by nature. I believe in trust. But my gut, that deep, primal instinct, was screaming that something was fundamentally wrong. It was a gnawing unease, a constant whisper of doubt that slowly eroded my peace of mind. The moment it all really clicked, the moment my world truly tilted on its axis, was on a random Thursday night. She came home late, much later than usual, and the air around her carried the distinct, cloying scent of expensive cologne. And it definitively, wasn't mine. Instead of offering any explanation, instead of even acknowledging my quiet presence, she just laughed when I gently asked who she was with. A cold, dismissive laugh that cut right through me. You worry too much, Caleb, she said, kicking off her shoes with a casual indifference that stunned me. She added, almost as an afterthought, if you can't handle me partying with my ex, maybe we should just break up. I just stood there, rooted to the spot, staring at her, utterly stunned into silence. My chest felt so tight, a crushing weight pressing down on my lungs. Not from anger, not yet anyway, but from that deep, soul-shattering kind of disappointment that just knocks the air right out of you. It felt like every effort I'd made, every compromise, every sacrifice, was just a joke to her. I had bent over backwards for this relationship, pouring my heart and soul into it. I'd supported her through multiple job changes, cheered her on when she felt discouraged, even helped her pay off part of her student debt when she was in a rough patch and couldn't make ends meet. And here she was, looking me dead in the eye, acting like it was no big deal to spend her weekends with the guy she used to date, openly disrespecting my feelings. The audacity of it all was breathtaking. A slow, chilling resolve settled over me. I forced a smile, but it wasn't happy. It was a grim, almost painful contortion of my lips. Good idea, I said quietly, the words feeling foreign yet solid on my tongue. And for the very first time, I saw a flicker of genuine surprise flash across her face. A moment of pure shock. She clearly hadn't expected me to call her bluff. She'd expected me to cave, to apologize, to grovel. But that night, something within me shifted irrevocably. That night, I barely slept. My mind was a whirlwind, racing through every moment, every suspicious text, every dismissive laugh. It wasn't just about Rachel anymore. It was about everything. My job, my future, this quiet, nagging feeling that I'd been holding myself back, dimming my own light for the sake of someone else's comfort. There had been an open promotion at work for months now, one that would require me to relocate across the country. A huge opportunity, a chance to really step up, but I'd been hesitating, you know? Rachel had said she wasn't ready to leave her family, her friends, her whole life here. And I'd said no to the promotion willingly because I thought we had a future together, a shared life that was more important than my individual aspirations. But by sunrise, as the first pale light crept through my window, my decision was made. The fog in my head cleared, leaving behind a stark, undeniable clarity. The very next day, I walked into my boss's office and accepted that promotion on the spot. My boss was thrilled. Apparently they'd been hoping I'd take it all along, sensing my potential even when I doubted myself. I signed the paperwork, set a move date for 2 weeks out, and by the end of the day, I was packing boxes in my apartment while Rachel sent me a cascade of passive-aggressive texts about how dramatic I was being, how I was overreacting. It felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life play out, an out-of-body experience. But underneath the numbness, underneath the whirlwind of logistics, there was this growing, intoxicating sense of incredible freedom. I wasn't just leaving Rachel behind. I was leaving behind the version of myself that kept settling for less than I deserved, the version that prioritized everyone else's comfort over my own growth. Every item I put into a box felt like shedding a layer of my old skin. A few days later, Rachel finally seemed to realize I wasn't bluffing. The silence from me, the steady progress of my packing, it must have finally sunk in. She texted me, "Can we talk?" I didn't respond right away. I didn't even look at the text for hours. Instead, I waited. I waited until I was standing in my brand new apartment, hundreds of miles away from everything that had been tying me down. The place was empty except for a single box and my suitcase, the walls echoing, but I had never felt lighter, never felt more like myself. I snapped a photo of the apartment keys resting on the gleaming counter, the sprawling city skyline visible through the huge window, a symbol of my new beginning, and sent it to her with a simple, devastating message. "Talk about what?" Her reply came almost instantly, a frantic flood of texts I didn't even bother to read right away. The power dynamic had shifted. And that's when everything with my family started to spiral, taking an even darker turn than I could have imagined. See, Rachel wasn't just my girlfriend. She was really close with my sister, Emily. They had a bond, a shared history, and apparently, she'd been filling my family's ears with her meticulously crafted side of the story, painting me as the villain. When I finally called my mom to tell her about the move, to share what I thought was exciting news, she didn't congratulate me. She didn't offer a word of pride or encouragement. Instead, her voice, usually so warm and supportive, was tight with disapproval. She just asked if I was really leaving just because Rachel went out with a few friends. It hit me like a physical slap to the face. This wasn't just about Rachel anymore. Suddenly, I was the bad guy in my own family, the one who was selfishly running away instead of working things out. My dad, usually the calm, logical one, made a comment about me being immature, and my sister accused me of abandoning everyone, of breaking up the family. I tried to explain, calmly at first, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands, that this was about so much more than just one night out. I told them I'd been feeling disrespected for months, that the relationship had become unhealthy. But no one seemed to want to hear my side, their minds already made up by Rachel's narrative. And that's when I realized something ugly, something profoundly painful. Maybe it wasn't just Rachel who had been treating me like my feelings didn't matter. Maybe my whole family had gotten a little too comfortable with me being the one who kept everything together, who stayed close by, who never rocked the boat. It was a sobering thought, a bitter pill to swallow. For the first time, I started to wonder if this move might be about more than just a job. It might be my first real shot at living life entirely on my own terms. But the more I pulled away, the more pressure they put on me. The phone calls became relentless, the texts accusatory. My sister, Emily, even showed up unannounced at my apartment one night, her face tight with anger, demanding I sit down and just talk to Rachel before I made such a big mistake. That was the night I snapped. The old Caleb, the people pleaser, was gone. "I'm not making a mistake," I told her, my voice low but firm. "I am finally making a choice. And I'm not going to let anyone guilt me out of it." But as I watched her storm out of my apartment, her heels clicking angrily down the hall, I had a sinking feeling. This was only the beginning. My family had never handled being told no very well. And something told me they weren't done trying to drag me back into the mess I'd just escaped. And I was right. When my sister stormed out that night, I thought maybe she just needed time to cool off. Maybe, just maybe, she'd call in a day or two with an apology, or at least be willing to listen to my side. Wishful thinking, right? The very next morning, my phone lit up with a barrage of texts, not from her, but from my mom. "Your sister is very upset," Mom wrote, her words laced with maternal guilt. "You owe her an apology." I just stared at the screen for a long moment, dumbfounded. I owed her an apology? For what? For setting a boundary? For saying no to being pressured back into a relationship I didn't want? For refusing to sit in the same room as a woman who treated my boundaries like they were optional accessories, easily discarded? I took a deep breath, the anger building, cold and steady in my chest, and typed back, "Mom, I'm not apologizing. I'm moving. My decision is final." Her reply came just a minute later, faster than I expected, laced with exasperation. "This isn't just about you, Caleb. We are a family. You can't just run away whenever things get hard." Something about that word, run, hit me hard. They were acting like I was a child throwing a tantrum, not an adult making a considered, life-altering choice about his own future. I set the phone down, feeling that old, familiar heaviness creep back into my chest, a shadow I had lived under for too long. The truth is, I had always been the easy kid in the family. My older brother, Mason, was the golden child, the loud, charming one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. Growing up, Mason was the one who got into trouble, came home past curfew, flunked classes, but he always managed to charm his way out of real consequences, usually with a quick smile and a shrug. Meanwhile, I did everything right. Good grades, part-time jobs, saved my money, stayed out of trouble. And yet, somehow, I was always the one told to compromise for the sake of keeping the peace, to be the bigger person when Mason crossed a line. This whole situation was just another painful repeat of that same old pattern. Mason had already texted me once since the breakup with a simple, dismissive, "Bro, just chill. She's hot. Don't be dumb." That was his idea of brotherly advice. Stay with a girl who openly disrespects you because she's attractive. The more I thought about it, the more frustrated I got, the deeper my resolve solidified. My move wasn't just about Rachel anymore. It was about finally stepping out of the suffocating shadow of my family's expectations. But they weren't going to let me go without a fight. That weekend, I went to drop off some of my old stuff at my parents' garage, things I didn't want to bring across the country, but didn't want to throw away either. When I pulled into the driveway, my stomach sank. Rachel's car was parked out front, glinting in the afternoon sun. A cold dread washed over me. I almost turned around right then, my hand hovering over the gear shift, but I told myself, maybe she was just here to pick up her own things. Maybe this would be a quick, quiet exchange. I was catastrophically wrong. The moment I walked into the house, a sudden silence fell. I knew. I just knew. My entire family was sitting in the living room, Mom, Dad, Mason, and Rachel. It was like some kind of ambush, a meticulously staged intervention. "Caleb," my mom said, her voice tight, almost artificially calm, but oddly rehearsed, like she'd practiced her lines. "We all think you're making a huge mistake." I looked at her, then at Rachel, who had the unmitigated audacity to look offended, like I was the one who had betrayed her. Her lips curled into a faint, smug smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "I didn't come here to have a family meeting," I said carefully, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "I came to drop off some boxes." My dad stood up, crossing his arms, a disapproving frown etched on his face. "You can't just throw away a good relationship over something so small." That's when something in me, that last fragile thread of patience, finally snapped. "Small?" I repeated, my voice rising, practically vibrating with disbelief and a building fury. "You think me being lied to for months is small? You think my girlfriend spending every weekend with her ex, laughing in my face, is small? You think me being laughed at when I try to talk about it is small?" The room went quiet for a moment, a sudden, heavy silence that felt like a vacuum. And for a brief second, a fleeting flicker of hope, I thought maybe they'd finally understood. But then Mason broke the tension with a scoff, followed by a derisive laugh. "Man, you're so dramatic," he said, shaking his head, utterly dismissive. "It's not like she cheated. You just can't handle a little competition." The blood pounded in my ears, a furious drumbeat. It was like every childhood memory of being brushed aside, every time Mason got away with something while I was told to be the bigger person, came flooding back all at once, overwhelming me. I put the boxes down on the floor with a thud that echoed in the quiet room and said, "I'm done. I'm not discussing this anymore." But as I turned to leave, Rachel spoke up for the first time, her voice dripping with false concern. "You're just proving everyone right, Caleb. You always run when things get hard. You'll never have a real relationship if you can't learn to forgive." That one stung. Not because I thought she was right, but because I could see my parents nodding along, silently agreeing with her, their faces etched with disappointment. I left without another word, my heart aching with a profound sense of betrayal. I got into my car and just sat there, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, the engine off, the silence broken only by the ragged sound of my own breathing. I should have felt relieved to finally say my piece, but instead, I felt hollow, utterly empty. I'd never been the kind of person to yell, to walk out on my family. But that's exactly what I'd just done. That night, I didn't pack a single box. I just sat in my half-empty apartment and stared at the wall, the fading light of evening casting long, skeletal shadows. I wondered if maybe they were right, if maybe I was overreacting, if I was just being dramatic. But then my phone buzzed again. It was Mason. And this time, he wasn't even pretending to be helpful. "You know, Mom's crying right now because of you," he texted, a thinly veiled attempt at emotional blackmail. "She says she doesn't even know who you are anymore. Hope you're happy." Something about that text snapped me out of my spiral completely. It was so transparent, so manipulative. I realized they weren't trying to understand me. They weren't seeking reconciliation. They were trying to manipulate me, to guilt me into undoing the decision I'd made, to keep playing my old role as the peacemaker, the easy kid. And for the first time, a cold, hard resolve set in. I decided I wasn't going to play it anymore. Over the next few days, I doubled down on my preparations for the move. I called the movers, signed my new lease, meticulously packed my belongings, and started clearing out my apartment. But the pushback from my family only got worse, more desperate. My mom started calling every night, leaving voicemails about how family should come first, how I was breaking her heart. Mason, in his usual passive-aggressive style, posted a photo of him, Rachel, and my parents having dinner together with the caption, "Family Night Red Heart," a clear message that I was easily replaceable. It felt like they were all teaming up, a united front designed to make me feel small, isolated, and guilty. By the end of that excruciating week, I was done feeling guilty. In fact, I was starting to feel something new, something powerful and exhilarating, determination. If they wanted me to be the villain for choosing myself for once, for daring to put my own well-being first, then fine. I'd play the part. And I'd play it well. And then came the phone call that changed everything. The one that pushed me from quietly leaving to actively planning how I was going to reclaim my life, not just for myself, but to send an undeniable message. It was from my dad. And what he said made me realize just how far they were truly willing to go to keep me under their control. When my dad called that Friday evening, I almost didn't answer. I'd been ignoring most of their calls that week, letting them go to voicemail, but something about seeing Dad's name on the screen made me pause. A tiny, foolish part of me still wanted to believe he'd finally hear me out, that he'd say something like, "Son, I get it. Do what's best for you." So, I swiped to answer. "Caleb," he said immediately, skipping all pleasantries, his voice devoid of warmth. "We need to talk face to face." My stomach sank, a familiar dread coiling in my gut. "About what?" I asked, my voice guarded. "About this nonsense with Rachel," he said, as if my entire life was merely a trivial squabble. "Your mother and I have been talking, and we think you're making a huge mistake throwing away a good thing." I rubbed my forehead, already feeling the familiar tension building, a dull ache behind my eyes. "Dad," I told him, trying to keep my voice even, this isn't up for debate. I'm not staying in a relationship that doesn't respect me. He sighed, long and heavy, the exasperated sound he always made when he thought I was being difficult, unreasonable. Caleb, you're not thinking clearly. You've always been too emotional. That's why we did what we did. I froze. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. What do you mean, what you did? There was a long, pregnant pause, the silence stretching, before he finally answered, his voice a little too calm. Rachel called us crying the night you broke things off. She didn't know what to do. So, we told her to come stay here for a while until you came to your senses. It took me a second, a gut-wrenching, agonizing second, to process what he was saying. You what? I whispered, the words barely audible. She needed support, Caleb, he said, as if this was the most obvious, logical thing in the world. She's family too. I felt like someone had punched me squarely in the chest, the air knocked out of me in a sudden, painful gasp. She's not family, I said, my voice quiet, but trembling with disbelief. She was my girlfriend. And you invited her to live with you? Here? In your house? For now, Dad said, brushing aside my outrage. We just don't want you to make a rash decision. If you could just sit down with her, talk like adults. Like adults. I cut him off, my voice sharper, louder than I intended, laced with incredulity. Dad, she humiliated me. She laughed in my face and told me I should be fine with her partying with her ex every weekend. And your solution is to let her move in with you under your roof. She's going through a lot, he said, completely unfazed by my anger, his tone irritatingly paternalistic. She needs stability right now. We all do. And you blowing up your life like this isn't helping anyone. That was it. That was the absolute, final breaking point. That was the moment the last thread of trust, the very last sliver of hope I had for my family, had snapped. Dad, I said, my voice shaking now, not from fear, but from pure, incandescent rage that had been simmering for weeks. You chose her over me. You didn't even bother to ask for my side of the story, to hear your son's feelings, before you gave my girlfriend, my ex, a room in your house. Do you have any idea how humiliating, how deeply betrayed that makes me feel? There was a heavy silence on the line, stretching out, and then he spoke again, his voice cold, dismissive. You're overreacting. I hung up. The abrupt click of the phone echoed in my quiet apartment, a stark punctuation mark on the end of our relationship. For a long time, I just sat there on my couch, phone still in my hand, staring at nothing, my mind a chaotic buzz of thoughts and emotions. But at the same time, everything felt strangely quiet, like a switch had flipped inside me, muting the noise. This wasn't just about Rachel anymore. It hadn't been for a while. But now it was undeniably clear. My own parents had sided with the person who hurt me the most, without hesitation, without even bothering to ask me how I felt, how their son felt. They'd crossed a line, a fundamental boundary of parental trust that I couldn't pretend away, couldn't rationalize, couldn't forgive. The next day, a cold, hard resolve settling in my chest, I drove to my parents' house. I didn't text ahead, didn't call. I just showed up, parked my car in the driveway, and walked up to the front door. I could see Rachel's car still parked at the curb, a sickening confirmation of my dad's words. And for a moment, a brief, fleeting instant, I almost turned back, the old doubts creeping in, but I didn't. I straightened my shoulders and rang the doorbell. My mom answered, and her face went from surprise to immediate, hopeful relief in an instant. Caleb, she said, her voice catching with emotion, already reaching for my arm. I'm so glad I'm not staying, I said gently, but with a firm edge, stepping past her into the familiar hallway. The living room was just like I remembered it, neat, comfortable, filled with the comforting smell of my mom's cooking, a stark contrast to the simmering tension in the air. Dad was sitting in his recliner, Mason on the couch, both looking up as I entered. Caleb, Dad said, his tone already edged with disapproval, as if I were a child caught misbehaving. You finally decided to come to your senses. I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled the envelope, which contained my carefully crafted letter, from my jacket and placed it deliberately on the coffee table. What's this? Mason asked, frowning, clearly confused by the formality. "A letter," I said, my voice flat, almost emotionless. "Everything I have to say is in there." Dad leaned forward, scowling, his patience clearly wearing thin. "If you have something to say it to our faces. Don't be a coward." I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt a strange, liberating sense of detachment. This was the man I had spent years trying to please, bending over backward to earn his approval. And right then, in that moment, I realized I didn't need it anymore. "I already did," I said quietly, my voice steady. "You just didn't listen." Mom looked stricken, her face paling. "Caleb, please, I'm moving today," I continued, cutting her off, keeping my voice steady, betraying no emotion. "Across the country. I won't be back for a long time. Maybe ever. You can read the letter after I'm gone, and then you can decide how you want to move forward." Mason scoffed, shaking his head. "This is so dramatic, dude. You're running away over a girl." I turned to him, calm as ever, my gaze unwavering. "This isn't about Rachel anymore, Mason. This is about the fact that my feelings have never been taken seriously in this family. This is about you all inviting my ex into your house without a second thought, siding with her over me, and even trying to change my bank address so you could keep tabs on me." That made Dad shift uncomfortably in his recliner, his eyes widening almost imperceptibly. "Good. He hadn't expected me to know about that." "You have no idea what you're talking about," he said, but his voice was just a little too defensive, a crack in his authoritative facade. "I do," I replied evenly, meeting his gaze head-on. "The credit union called me. I have their report with the date and time of the request. You crossed the line, Dad, and that's why I'm done." The room was dead silent. A profound, aching silence. For a moment, no one spoke. My mom's eyes were shiny with unshed tears. Mason's jaw was tight, his usual smirk gone. And my dad looked like he'd just been caught with his hand in the cookie jar, exposed and ashamed. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shout. I just stood there, perfectly calm, and let them sit in the heavy, suffocating weight of it all. Then, with a quiet strength I hadn't known I possessed, I turned toward the door. "Caleb, wait," Mom said, stepping forward, her voice a desperate plea. "Please, if you go now, I am going," I said softly, but with absolute finality. "You can call me when you're ready to treat me like someone whose voice matters. Until then, I have nothing more to say." I walked out without another word, leaving them in their stunned silence. Outside, the air felt crisp and cool, a cleansing breeze, like a reset button had just been pressed on my entire life. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove to the nearest mailbox, a quiet, almost ceremonial detour. I dropped a second copy of the letter inside, just to make sure they couldn't ignore it, couldn't deny its existence, couldn't twist its words later. And then I drove away, not just from their house, but from the entire city, from the weight of years of expectation and unspoken resentment. It was a long drive to the new place. Hours of open road ahead of me, stretching into the unknown, but for the first time in months, I felt completely at peace. The knot of tension in my shoulders began to loosen, the incessant buzzing in my mind finally quieted. I wasn't running anymore. I was free. When I arrived at my new apartment late that night, the city lights twinkling below like a scattered handful of diamonds, I set my phone on the counter and left it there without checking it. Whatever voicemails or texts were waiting could stay there until morning. Instead, I opened the blinds, stepped out onto the balcony, and just stood there, looking out over the unfamiliar, vibrant cityscape. And I smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. Not because everything was suddenly perfect, but because I had finally chosen myself. The real revenge, I realized, wasn't yelling or slamming doors or even proving them wrong. It was standing in that quiet apartment, hundreds of miles away, living a life that was entirely mine, one built on my terms, and knowing that they were going to have to sit with the knowledge that they pushed me to this point. And something told me they weren't going to like that feeling one bit. Because the next morning, when the sun finally streamed through my new window, I brewed coffee in my still half-unpacked kitchen and opened my phone. And there it was, exactly what I expected. Missed calls, dozens of them, a testament to their frantic attempts to reach me. and one message from my dad, short and clipped, devoid of his usual authority. "We need to talk." I put the phone down and smiled to myself. They were feeling it now. The space, the silence, the undeniable consequence of their choices. And I wasn't done yet, because I had one more step planned, one final, undeniable way to make sure they never forgot what happened here. The morning after the move felt different, almost unnervingly quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm, when everything has been torn apart, but the air is finally clear, holding the promise of a new beginning. I brewed coffee in my new kitchen, still half full of unpacked boxes, the scent of fresh grounds filling the unfamiliar space, and finally opened my phone. The notifications were endless. Calls, texts, even voicemails stacked up like a monument to their panic. For a moment, I considered deleting them all, wiping the slate clean, and starting fresh. But then I pressed play on the first voicemail. It was my mom. Her voice was shaky, raw with a vulnerability I hadn't heard in years. "Caleb, we read your letter. I truly didn't realize how hurt you were. I thought we were helping, trying to keep the family together, but maybe I just made things worse. Please call me." The next voicemail was from Dad, and it sounded nothing like the authoritative, lecturing man who had dismissed my feelings just a week ago. His voice was lower, slower, etched with a quiet regret. "I didn't mean to violate your trust, son. I honestly thought I was protecting you, but I can see now that I overstepped. I should have let you handle things your own way. If you ever want to talk, my door's open." Then, there was one from Mason, too, though his was more blunt, less polished. "Okay, fine. You win. Mom's been crying for days and Dad's been in a mood. You got what you wanted. Hope you're happy." I wasn't happy in the way Mason implied, not exactly. There was no triumphant joy, no gloating satisfaction. But I wasn't sad either. I listened to the rest of the voicemails, most of them variations of apologies, awkward attempts to justify their actions, and hesitant admissions that they'd made mistakes. And as I sat there, sipping my coffee, looking out at my new city, I realized something profoundly important. This was the first time in my entire life that my family wasn't brushing my feelings aside. They weren't telling me to calm down. They weren't telling me to compromise. They weren't telling me to be the bigger person. They were finally sitting with the uncomfortable, undeniable fact that I wasn't coming back. Not unless they learned how to truly respect me. The silence from me had forced them to listen. Later that week, I got a small, unexpected package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a stack of old family photos, neatly bundled together with a thin ribbon and a note on top in my mom's familiar handwriting. "We thought you'd want these for your new place. Love, Mom." I sat there holding the bundle, staring at the familiar faces smiling back at me from Christmases and birthdays past. This time, though, the photos didn't sting with the pain of betrayal or regret the way they had before. Instead, they felt like a choice, something I could keep, not something I was chained to. I put them in a small box and slid it onto a shelf. Not front and center, but not hidden either, just there, a quiet acknowledgement of a complicated past. 2 weeks later, my mom called again, this time not to beg, but just to ask how I was doing, how the new job was, how I was settling in. The conversation was short, polite, almost cautious, as if we were navigating a delicate new terrain. It felt like a new chapter, one where we might actually build something healthy, something based on mutual respect, instead of replaying the same old, painful patterns. But the most surprising moment came a month later when Mason called me out of the blue. "Hey," he said, his tone more serious than usual, a hint of genuine introspection in his voice. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about respect. Maybe I haven't been the best brother to you, Caleb." I leaned back in my chair, utterly stunned. Mason had never apologized for anything in his life, at least not to me. "I appreciate that, Mason," I said quietly, genuinely surprised by his admission. He hesitated, then said, "Mom and Dad are different lately. Less. I don't know. Controlling. I think you scared them straight, man." I chuckled softly, a genuine laugh. "I didn't scare them," I said. "I just finally told them where the line was." We didn't talk long, but when I hung up, I felt a weight, an ancient burden I hadn't even realized I was carrying, lift off my shoulders. The family dinners I used to dread, the ones filled with unspoken tensions and passive aggression, eventually started up again, just without Rachel at the table. She had apparently moved out of state herself, disappearing from our lives as quickly as she'd entered. And whatever story she told about what happened between us didn't matter anymore, because I had my own story now. And it ended here, on a cool evening a few months later, when I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, watching the sun sink behind the city skyline, painting the clouds in hues of orange and purple. The world felt wide open, vast, and full of possibilities. I took a deep breath, pulled out my phone, and sent one final message to the family group chat, the first I'd sent in months. Dinner's on me next time I'm in town. My treat. We can catch up if you're ready. A minute later, my mom sent a simple heart emoji. I smiled, a quiet, knowing smile, set the phone down, and leaned on the balcony railing, feeling the warm wind on my face, the pulse of the city beneath me. This wasn't the ending where everything was magically fixed, wrapped up in a neat little bow. This was better because it was real. I had walked away. I had set my boundaries, and I had proven to myself and to them that I could build a life that was entirely mine, a life filled with genuine respect and true freedom. And as I stood there watching the city lights flicker to life, reflecting on the journey that had brought me here, I said it out loud, just for myself, letting the words hang in the night air. I'm finally free. And for the first time in a long, long time, I truly, deeply believed it. Honestly, I'd love to know what you would have done in my shoes. Have you ever had to choose yourself over family expectations, even when it felt like you were risking everything? Drop a comment below. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts and experiences.